Most people remember 2020 as the year they were locked into their homes for several months, but for me, it was the year I learned that the entire Megami Tensei franchise was spawned out of a novel about school violence, occult rituals, and virtual reality demon sex. Ever since then, this shit's followed me around like a curse. I just keep uncovering more and more things about Digital Devil's story, and it seems to have no end. I've talked extensively about the first novel, as well as its many video game adaptations, from MSX computers to the Famicom, and even a fucking Chinese flip phone. And let's not forget the anime, which contains probably the greatest single bit of animation in all of existence. Despite all of that, I somehow still have unfinished business with Digital Devil's story and its asshat protagonist, Akemi Nakajima. As it turns out, his story doesn't end quite as soon as I thought it did. I guess I should have expected as much from a series that has Reincarnation in the title, but my god, give me a break already. Nakajima's fate differs pretty significantly depending on whether you're looking at the games or the novels, but in both cases, he kinda gets the shit end of the stick. On the video game side of things, after 20 or 30 hours of dungeon crawling action, Nakajima and his partner Yumiko Shirasagi successfully journey to the center of a labyrinth that appears over the burial site of the goddess Izanami, where they defeat Lucifer and later, witness a nuclear explosion that starts a worldwide demon apocalypse, which leads into the second Digital Devil story game, where he's never seen again. On the other hand, the third novel gives absolutely zero shits and outright murders Nakajima. See, the events of this one have Nakajima brought into a court being controlled by Lucifer, where he's made to answer for the violent revenge he previously took against his bullies, as well as the fact that he's got a significant hand in the ongoing demon uprising. Despite apparently still being a minor, Nakajima is given the death penalty, and Lucifer decides to tie the boy up and have his father trampled to death in front of him. In a fit of rage, he manages to attack the crowd, but ends up hurting Yumiko, who is then forced to kill him. Then the book ends. This novel, the third and final entry in the Digital Devil story series, was actually released after the video game adaptations, and initially it gave me the impression that writer Aya Nishitani was tired of the series and wanted to end things on his own terms, or that maybe he wanted to really shock his fans as they witnessed Nakajima finally pay the price for the damage he had caused. Whatever the case, it was one hell of a way to leave things off for our young protagonist. His death and the events surrounding it are downright brutal, and the demons are never stopped. Surely that's not the end, right? I mean, there's gotta be more. You can't just do him that dirty and then move on with your life. Well, sure fucking enough, the story does continue. Not for one book, or two, or even three, but for 6 more novels, all a part of the not-so-creatively titled New Digital Devil Story series. I mentioned this series very briefly in my original examination of the origins of Megami Tensei, but I didn't have much to say. These books are hard to come by, they've never been translated, and as far as I'm aware, there aren't even any PDFs or anything floating around on the internet to look at. Fortunately, in the 2 years that have passed since then, I've managed to scrape together a lot of information from a series of Japanese fan websites, and have compiled all of it to come up with plot summaries for each of the 6 books. I've also had time to re-examine the original trilogy, particularly the second and third entries, which I didn't go into much detail on previously due to the fact they aren't very relevant to the games. I never saw myself making another video about some old-ass novels of all things, but easily accessible information about them in English isn't that common, and it's my hope that perhaps we can spark additional interest in these books and have them translated somehow one day. This is about as far out as I think you can get with Digital Devil story, so once again, we're going to take up the task of exploring the furthest depths of Megami Tensei, as we explore all 9 of Aya Nishitani's DDS novels, from the original trilogy to a look into the unknown with the events of the 6 entries in its follow-up series. Feel free to use the timestamps below to skip to whichever book you're most interested in. Otherwise, we're going to jump right back in at the start and see the entire story through to the end. Let's do it. Originally released on March 3rd, 1986, the very first Digital Devil story novel introduces us to the world of Akemi Nakajima, a genius high school student who excels at using computers. If you've watched my channel previously, you might recognize this as at least the 5th time I've spoken about this story. I considered leaving this one out since I've covered it more times than any sane person should, but it'd feel kinda weird doing every other book except this one, so bear with me. Our guy Nakajima is noted to have a very attractive, feminine appearance, so much so that if you were to put him in a sailor suit, he'd easily pass for a beautiful girl. Oh yeah, and he likes to listen to the band Whitesnake. You'd think this fucker would have the entire school wrapped around his finger with his irresistible charm, but as always, there's a catch. Nakajima is arrogant and sees himself as a bit too good for most of his classmates. In fact, he's even a member of the intellectually gifted group at his school, something which further divides him from a significant portion of the student body. To further round out his asshole-ish personality, Nakajima rejects every girl that dares to make a romantic advance towards him, and eventually, this comes back to bite him in the ass. One day, when Nakajima ignores the flirtatious Kyoko Takamizawa, who is part of the underachievers crowd, she decides to get back at him by telling this roided-out meatstick Hiroyuki Kondo that Nakajima had made some unwanted moves on her. This little lie ends up causing Nakajima to get his shit beat in, and well, he kinda snaps afterwards. At home, Nakajima combines his unmatched computer abilities with the powers of the occult to develop a demon summoning program to get his revenge. See, the school faculty really turn a blind eye to a lot of the bullying that takes place, and Nakajima thinks he can do a better job of fixing the problem on his own. He barely acknowledges his own mother's presence while he's at home, and his father is stated to be away overseas on a business trip, essentially giving the kid free rein to do whatever the hell he wants. His home computer isn't quite strong enough to spawn the legions of hell, however, so he's forced to sneak into the school at night and use their big-ass host computer. After decking out the place with satanic imagery, Nakajima gets caught by his professor, who doesn't really do much to stop him. And honestly, how can you blame him? I'd probably shit myself too if I ran up on this in the middle of the night. Not much ends up happening when the demon summoning program is run with the orders to kill Kyoko and Kondo. At least, not yet. Later, during computer class when everyone is learning about Microsoft Word or some shit, the demon Loki makes itself known, taking control of nearly the entire class through their computer monitors, except for Nakajima, Kyoko, Kondo, and for some reason, the teacher. The army of mind-controlled students violently kill the three as Nakajima watches, though he's confused and kinda upset about the teacher being thrown into the mix. This wasn't part of the plan, and he never had any desire for more death beyond his bullies. It's almost like this ancient being has no regards for the feelings of a nerd-ass computer programmer. Now you might think after this hot fucking mess Nakajima would chill out, but the heights of his stupidity are still far in the distance, and the incident only encourages him to continue messing with demons. Loki doesn't want to work for free and has Nakajima deliver him sexual partners to, enjoy with this big-ass coitus facilitation headset. He ends up tricking one of his teachers, Ohara, into doing this, and the encounter changes her forever as she basically becomes totally brainwashed, as seen in some of the opening scenes of the anime, where she just lets Nakajima go on fucking Wall Street bets or some shit while he's in class. It's right around here that the novel formally introduces Yumiko Shirasagi, a transfer student from Hokkaido who eventually becomes Nakajima's demon-slaying partner. She feels a strong connection to him, but mostly gets ignored. What Nakajima doesn't know is that she actually witnessed the whole shebang with Ohara, but didn't really know what to make of it. Not only that, the two are reincarnations of ancient Japanese deities, Izanagi and Izanami. They just don't realize it yet. While these deities didn't have a perfect relationship in mythology, their bond does go back thousands of years, and well, it's the very same goddess reincarnation that the title of the book refers to. It's a fairly obvious twist if you can call it that, especially considering that Nakajima experiences these night terrors of living in some ancient time being chased by a zombie woman. So, Loki eventually wants a piece of the fresh meat, and tries to get Nakajima to use Yumiko as yet another sacrifice. Feeling that same unexplainable sense of connection with Yumiko, he refuses, and Loki snaps at him, warning Nakajima to remember who's in control. Nakajima is totally oblivious to the fact that Loki aims to take advantage of a pretty powerful aspect of his demon summoning program, that it's seemingly able to transfer demons to other locations through computers, something the book aptly refers to as demon transfer theory. Essentially, demons are no longer just confined to where they're summoned, they can be digitized and travel electronically, and eventually manifest physically. Also, Loki's already started killing more people in the real world, having partially manifested himself in an office building as a bunch of nasty-ass goo and ectoplasm with the help of the brainwashed Ohara. This boy is in so much shit, and he has no idea. Despite his best attempts at scaring Yumiko off, Nakajima fails at keeping her away, and she ends up being forced into the host's computer room by a bunch of hypnotized students, as well as Ohara. This is where shit goes off the rails. With no choice but to begin the ritual of offering Yumiko up as a sacrifice, Nakajima's situation rapidly escalates out of control as Loki fully enters the physical world. As he scrambles to think of a way to force Loki back into the computer, the demon's arms turn into, and I quote, giant jiggling, pink-colored blobs of protoplasm. Nakajima tries asking a computer AI named Kraft, which makes a few appearances throughout the book to explain sciencey shit about what the hell he should do. But it doesn't give him any immediately useful results. Shit gets predictably violent as the tentacles grab Yumiko as well as Ohara. In the anime, this is definitely gory, but in the book, it's a lot more sexual. The use of tentacles is very intentional. Ohara actually becomes impregnated with some kind of demon, but thankfully the details on that are mostly spared. This shit's stupid as hell to the point that it goes past being offensive and just straight into schlocky gross out horror. Just as it looks like Yumiko's about to be totally killed off, Nakajima manages to summon Cerberus, who doesn't actually help that much but provides a slight distraction. On the brink of her death, Yumiko becomes possessed by the spirit of Izanami, who refuses to let her die. She then jolts back awake, zaps the shit out of Loki with bouts of flame, and opens a portal to Asuka, an area which contains the burial site of Izanami, where she and Nakajima finally escape, but not before taking a mortal blow to the back. Nakajima feels like hot ass after causing so much destruction, as well as the impending death of the one person who actually gave a shit about him. As he tries to comfort Yumiko in her final moments, he learns that the only way to salvage some of this day is to bring her to the tomb where Izanami was buried. Mondays, am I right? Well, it's time for a road trip. With the help of Cerberus, he begins his journey, unaware that Loki is stalking them using his apparent ability to gather information using flies. After informing Ohara of his plan to finish off Nakajima, Loki too begins to make his way to the tomb. There's a pretty funny part of the book where Nakajima and Cerberus rush past some dudes hiking, and they just write it off as someone filming a movie. It specifically notes that the hikers aren't fazed by what they see whatsoever, and the scene is totally irrelevant to the plot. Meanwhile, Loki massacres a bank in order to begin his quest for world domination. Guess he made a pit stop on the way to the tomb? As Nakajima arrives and squeezes his way down into a cold chamber, he's eventually forced to face the tomb's guardian, Yomotsu Shikome, who is given a very grotesque description, having a bloated stomach and massive drooping breasts, as well as webbed hands and a face like a frog. Great. The creature takes Yumiko further into the tomb and vomits up 2 nice blue spheres for Nakajima to use. All while this is happening, Loki is upstairs losing his shit because the tomb has a chemical reaction with his skin. But this doesn't last long, and he does eventually get in, where he then tears Yomotsu Shikome apart and proceeds to try and convince Nakajima to join his side, creating horrific hallucinations of the many deaths this book has depicted. Yumiko appears to rot in front of Nakajima and attack him, forcing him even further back into the tomb, where he wildly flails around and starts to throw ashes in her face, which turn out to be special ashes that ward off evil spirits. Izanami appears and fails in her effort to cast out Loki, who seems very keen on, having more sex. Even Cerberus is unable to help out, but fortunately, Nakajima smacks his 2 blue balls together, which summons the sword Hino Kagetsuchi, which he then slams directly into Loki's forehead. Nice. As things wind down, we enter the book's epilogue, where a pregnant Ohara speaks with the evil Egyptian god Set on the computer. It looks like this party has only just begun. And that's Digital Devil's story Megami Tensei. Pretty short, very violent, very sexual, irresponsible for all his shit. I still find it pretty astounding that such a goofy-ass horror novel ended up inspiring such a massive series. I mean, what the hell? Honestly, I do enjoy this book as a standalone thing. It's got a simple turn your brain off and watch shit go down kind of plot, and Nakajima sorta redeems himself. It even has a classic horror stinger ending. I can appreciate a certain level of groundedness in this story too. Don't get me wrong, it's ridiculous, but it does a good job of building up the mystery around technology and pretty much nails an almost humorously dark atmosphere. As for the next couple of books, they lean heavier into fantasy and sci-fi, and I think it's a bit less compelling. When I first read this book, I thought the idea of summoning demons on the computer was kinda silly, but since then, I've expanded some of my knowledge on 80s and 90s horror, and I think I appreciate it a bit more than I used to. You should read this book, it's definitely worth it, still not Shakespeare, but an undeniably classic part of the Megaten franchise nonetheless. So how's the sequel? Well, it's fucking insane. Released on October 31st, 1986, Digital Devil Story 2 Warrior of the Demon City introduces magicians, special forces agents, and a space battle with a snake. Yeah. So the book starts off in Massachusetts, introducing these two brothers, Charles and Isma Feed. You think there's a third one named Chuck? Anyway. Charles is an engineer at MIT, and he's also the founder of the International Satanist Garden that wishes to further science through the use of magic. Isma just wants to use evil magic to serve himself and be an asshole. We see this very quickly as an FBI agent finally tracks Isma down and prepares to arrest him for his many crimes, only to be quickly overpowered by magic and killed. Then things cut back to Japan, where it's explained that the incident Nakajima caused was written off as a student riot. Sure, we'll go with that. We see Ohara steal the demon summoning program from the school's computer room, only to be whisked away by Isma Feed, who has arrived in search of Nakajima, having heard that he successfully managed to summon a demon on his own. At a nearby hotel, Isma, with the help of a tycoon named Shimazaki, violently forces Ohara to join forces with them, as he isn't convinced that she can handle the power of Set. Isma then orders Shimazaki to prepare a computer to begin using the summoning program. While this is going down, Nakajima and Yumiko are down in Izanami's tomb. Nakajima is told by Izanami to picture the one who needs him the most. His first thought is Yumiko, but visions of his mother begin to take over, and suddenly he finds himself back in the house, sitting across from her on the sofa. She suddenly jolts up and hugs him, and Nakajima seems to realize that he hasn't made much of an effort to communicate with her in several years. In yet another location, we meet Narukawa, a special forces agent who aims to help Charles Feed investigate the events at Nakajima's high school. They know that Nakajima has at some point made use of Craft, the computer AI which answered some of his questions previously. This AI happens to be housed in Massachusetts. Eventually, a government man ends up visiting Nakajima's home and bringing him to a hospital where he cooperates with Feed and Narukawa, explaining all the crazy shit that went down in the first book. They note that he probably won't be charged with murder or anything, since he technically didn't kill anyone. They might be able to nail him with misusing a computer though. During this conversation, Narukawa has a feeling about Nakajima similar to when Yumiko met him, a sense of familiarity. They all want to track down the whereabouts of the demon summoning program, and Nakajima assumes that Ohara probably has it. Meanwhile, Isma and Ohara form a contract with Set, offering him a way to the physical world in exchange for some of his power. The best part of this agreement is when Set exclaims, "I vow in the name of Nut to form a contract with you." Now I'm sorry, Egyptian mythology isn't my thing, so it's probably not pronounced Nut, but I digress. So, Isma has very little luck in actually getting his homemade summoning device to bring Set to Earth, but he and Shimazaki do succeed in summoning many little snake demons and use them to control a Japanese politician and influence his stance on a National Secrets Protection Act. Passing this act would restrict the flow of certain types of information, which is one step closer to creating a world that allows evil to thrive. Realizing that Nakajima and Charles Feed are working together, Isma sends out Ohara against them to test their abilities. So this is all well and good, but what the hell is Yumiko up to? Apparently, undergoing some mystical training with Izanami. Things are going well until she's suddenly struck with a disturbing vision accompanied by the smell of blood. Yumiko senses that something is wrong with her mother, and she's right. Ohara went to her house and killed her entire family. Jesus Christ. Well, the way Ohara sees it, it's Yumiko's fault that Loki was able to be overpowered, and getting back at Yumiko's family may as well be the first step in making things right. I really hate this lady, but then again, this is all actually Nakajima's fault. Upon finding her slain family, Yumiko's reaction is surprisingly calm, though she naturally has a deep rage for Ohara and complex feelings of love and irritation towards Nakajima. I mean, if it were me, irritation would be putting it lightly, but I guess opening yourself up to goddess powers allows you to control your anger better. Ohara's murderous rampage ends up finding its way towards Nagajima's house, as she seems to hypnotize his mother and await his return. When he walks in, they get into a big-ass fight to the death in the living room, but it goes south quickly when Nagajima's possessed mother stabs him in the back with a kitchen knife. Then, Yumiko, on her way to see Nagajima, walks in and causes his mother to burst into flames. She saved his life, but my god, this shit is like a tragedy circle jerk. So, Ohara escapes to a nearby forest, but Yumiko follows and then kills her off too, in a rather short and anticlimactic scene. Can you see why I'm not as fond of this book yet? It just feels so much less compelling to me. I've seen a few people say this is the better book when compared to the first, but to me, it just feels like the author was playing with a lot of ideas and it all comes out pretty sloppy. Now don't worry, the best is still yet to come, and this might redeem it for some of you. Right as Ohara gets finished off, the summoning ritual for Set finally ends up working, and Izuma steps out of the building he's in, detecting a massive amount of demon energy. From Ohara's body, a big gelatinous blob emerges and engulfs Yumiko. You, remember how she was carrying Loki's demon child? Yeah, Set, uses this energy to begin birthing himself from Ohara. It's kinda yucky. This book loves to swap perspectives, so after this scene, we go back to Nakajima and the boys training and looking around for Yumiko, as well as computers capable of using the summoning program. They also work on developing a demon banishment program. At one point, Narakawa announces that over 1,000 police officers are searching for Ohara as they speak, which gives you an idea of how much the events are escalating in the public eye. The next few scenes just get fucking weird, and I know that's a lot considering all the stuff I've been talking about up to this point. To keep it simple, thousands of people are suddenly brainwashed into moving directly to the spot where Yumiko was engulfed in demonic goo. Everyone forms a huge circle around her where she's now been crucified. A man in a black robe near the cross raises his hands, and everyone rushes in, becoming enveloped into this shit the book calls an amoeba. Then, the following section explains that Izuma pulled this off by borrowing Set's power. The combined energy or magnetite found within all of these people, combined with Yumiko, would be enough to summon greater demons. Sure enough, Izuma summons the demon Typhon, who begins to wreak havoc. The government is basically stumped at how to fix this shit, and they do their best to keep it out of the news. Nakajima decides to head there out of duty to his friend, and Narakawa and Charles Feed follow, pretty pissed off with the government's inability to do anything worthwhile. On their way out, they get shot at by other members of the Special Forces, who seem to want to put the gang down for going rogue, but Nakajima is able to dispatch them by summoning Cerberus from behind cover. He asks the demon not to kill anyone, but clearly he hasn't learned his lesson because it doesn't really play out that way. Narakawa realizes that Izuma has extended his influence into the government by using demonic power, hence why the Special Forces were so quick to shoot without asking questions. As they get closer to the forest, they encounter roaming demons like a harpy and a demon monkey. Soon, they run up on Typhon and Izuma himself. While the group succeeds at fighting off Typhon, Izuma taunts Nakajima by letting him know that Yumiko will be subject to unimaginable pain as she acts as the catalyst for demons to reach Earth. Suddenly, Narakawa transforms into Tsukiyomi, a Japanese deity of the moon. Guess that explains the deja vu from earlier, though this isn't quite a goddess reincarnation. It's close enough. Tsukiyomi finishes off Typhon and causes Izuma to burst into flames. This book really likes having people just explode into fire. Set decides to start intervening directly, and Tsukiyomi decides to hold his ground and give Nakajima and Charles Feed a chance to escape. There's a part where Nakajima wants to go back and try to save Tsukiyomi, and Charles Feed pistol whips him in the back of the head to stop him. That's kinda extra, isn't it? So they dip, and soon the sounds of combat gradually begin to fade away. Narakawa, in his enhanced form, had sacrificed himself to save the two, and it looks like the rest is on them. Things pick up back at the American Embassy, where Feed announces a plan to get rid of Set once and for all. He's going to try and have him summoned into a fucking satellite in space, trapping him there forever. Nakajima isn't having any of that, since Yumiko would likely be killed in the process, and well, she'd be stuck in a satellite regardless. He visits Izanami's tomb, and gets a special robe that'll let him fly into space. All while this is going on, we learn that a little political crisis is emerging as thousands of soldiers try to deal with the giant amoeba flesh thing composed of thousands of people. President Reagan from the United States even gets involved with the situation, as more and more people are hypnotized and drawn to Japan's new massive flesh construction. Around this time, Izuma's partner Shimazaki is killed off by a demon who had infiltrated the government. Making his way up to space, Nakajima floats around with his magical robe as fighter jets soar around him. Set ends up being summoned into the satellite, where Nakajima challenges him. Together, with the help of Yumiko, who's at this point inside of Set's body, they attack him from the inside and outside, eventually bringing him down. Here's where the peak of Nakajima's stupidity comes into play. Yumiko, still crucified and attached to all this shit, is the catalyst between our world and the demon world. If she dies, the demons have no way of coming in. The whole conflict would be over. Tragic, but the world would literally be saved. Nakajima, unwilling to let his friend die, says, and I quote, "I pick you over the 5 billion other humans," and rips her off the cross, meaning things will only get much, much worse. I get it, they're best friends, but my god, this guy just cannot make a positive influence on the world to save his life. So that's the end of book 2. Again, it's batshit insanity, and it's not quite as good to me as the first book. The sci-fi is just 100% ridiculous, and to me, that dark, strange atmosphere is gone, replaced with goofy political intrigue and international wizards. Definitely a step down as far as I'm concerned, but elements of the story do make it into the games. For example, using Izanami's robe is a significant event in the Famicom and Super Famicom games, as is fighting Set as a boss. Sequels are rarely better than the originals anyway, but hey, maybe third time's the charm. Let's check out book 3. Digital Devil Story 3, Demise of the Reincarnation was released on February 29th, 1988. The name really doesn't pull any punches about what happens in this one. Unlike the first two, which have English fan translations, this one and all that follow do not. My summaries won't have nearly the same level of detail due to my reading ability, but I have come up with a more complete version of the information I presented previously in other videos. So, the opening parts of the story concern Lucifer confronting Izanami to stop her from bestowing any more power on Nakajima and Yumiko. Lucifer's plan is to take advantage of the demonic apocalypse Nakajima has caused to return to Earth, personally slay him, and rule the world. A month after the whole shit show with Set, Tokyo has kinda become a dump. The citizens have to follow a forced curfew, armed soldiers are everywhere, you know how it is. Nakajima and Yumiko are hiding out at a CIA safe house with Professor Feed, so at least they're safe for now. The first part of Lucifer's plan is to establish a cult of sirens who can control people with their singing. Lucifer also strikes a deal with one of the demons embedded in the government to create a law that sentences to death anyone who uses demons to nefarious ends. I think you can see where he's going with this. The demons in the city kind of war against each other, and the siren cult gathers more and more power. Amidst all of this, a surprise character enters the equation. Nakajima's dad is back from buying cigarettes. Oh shit. While she's hiding out with Nakajima, Yumiko receives word from Izanami to return to Asuka. Feed instructs Nakajima to do some shit about all these demons, and he decides to head to Asuka with her to see what's up. Leaving the comfort of their CIA safe house, Nakajima and Yumiko are then ambushed outside by the siren cult. Nakajima gets the shit beat out of him, but goes absolutely fucking ballistic when Yumiko is referred to as a monster because of some of the injuries she had sustained when dealing with Set. He heads straight into the angry mob and kills many of them. Keep in mind, these aren't just demons, but ordinary people acting under demon influence. An angry boy slashing up a crowd of people doesn't look very good out of context. So, Nakajima gets apprehended and brought to court, where the new Defense of Demonic States Act is about to get him in serious trouble. Yumiko and Charles Feed are kept from being involved with the trial, as it's under the control of Lucifer. The parents of Nakajima's old classmates basically put him through the ringer, and his many crimes are brought to public view. While he takes the time to explain that he only did it for revenge and because he was assaulted first, it's not quite enough to convince anyone, and he gets sentenced to death. Nakajima notes feeling a sense of relief about finally confessing to the horrible shit that's been going on in his life. Lucifer isn't just happy with killing Nakajima, and decides to make him suffer further by having his father murdered in front of him by the Siren Cult. In a bloodthirsty, murderous rage, Nakajima manages to fight back against the crowd. Blinded by anger, he ends up attacking Yumiko. Izanami takes control of Yumiko's body and zaps him in retaliation. As he breathes his last while laying in the arms of Yumiko, she nearly kills herself out of despair, but later, we're told that Izanami, again using Yumiko's body, carries Nakajima to Asuka to be buried with her forever. And that's the end of the original Digital Devil Story trilogy. Lucifer wins and our heroes are in shambles. I'm pretty mixed on this ending. It just feels so mean-spirited and brutal, but I mean, maybe that's about as good of an ending as you can expect for someone like Nakajima. He's a terrible guy. Sure, he's lonely and just wanted a taste of justice, but that doesn't excuse all the shit he did. I suppose you could say he deserves such a dramatic consequence for all that he's done. Then again, it kinda makes the trilogy feel a little pointless, like it all leads up to nothing. Though, I guess nobody ever said this was an action story. At its core, it's supposed to be horror, so a shitty ending shouldn't be much of a surprise. Broadly generalizing the events of the 3 books, they tell the story of the rise and fall of one really lonely and misguided kid. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth, but it's also kinda metal as fuck. So now, it's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. New Digital Devil Story. Did these books offer any sort of hope for the world Nakajima left behind, or are we just gonna have to endure another deluge of non-stop trauma? Let's crack this shit open and check it out. On May 31st, 1990, a fresh book for a new decade was released. New Digital Devil Story, Goddess of Enchainment. Who the fuck is this? Well, this is our new protagonist, Kita Asuka. After succeeding in killing Nakajima, Lucifer's control has spread far and wide over Japan, and the country has been divided up into territories for people and those for demons. We learn that Izanami, using Yumiko's body, put up a fight against the demon uprising, but was eventually overwhelmed and defeated. A god called Tagu Nigu makes an effort to revive Izanami with a spell, but it instead revives Yumiko herself, who is then captured by someone called Count Saint Germain, a magician and Lucifer's chief of staff. He wants to use Yumiko as a captive source of magnetite, just like Set did, so the demons can remain on Earth. Count Saint Germain also possesses a hologram version of Nakajima, much to the interest of Yumiko, but naturally he's actually still dead, so she isn't exactly feeling any better than before. The story then picks up a year later from these events with Kita Asuka, a second year at the very same school that Nakajima attended. He's a kid that has trouble falling in line with a rebellious attitude. Interestingly, he has the same deja vu feeling about the school that other characters in these books have before they realize they're a reincarnation of something. One day, Asuka and his friend Reiko Kido are talking about X-waves, which are a form of energy given off by demons, even if they assume a human appearance. There are some people in the world that can see X-waves, and Reiko happens to be one of them. Later that night, Asuka has a dream in which he's a baby and Yumiko is his mother. He sees the face of another unfamiliar man in his dream. Guess who it is? Come on, guess. Yeah, it's Nakajima. Shit starts getting fishy at the school when a group of officials arrive to start rooting out people that either dislike the government or have supernatural abilities. Their presence in the school is officially explained as being for the purpose of a traveling lecture, but that's a fat load of lies. Well, it turns out we have something to be worried about. Reiko is a member of the Tokyo branch of the Pontifical Crusade Against Demons. What a mouthful. Asuka is forced to save Reiko from being found out, and he then learns that the majority of the world is actually controlled by demonic forces. Asuka decides to join up with the group after learning that Yumiko may still be out there somewhere. The Crusader hideout is quickly discovered by authorities not long after, and Asuka, Reiko, and one of the Crusaders, a guy named Father Costa, are forced to escape through the sewers. They end up in a strange, lawless area of Tokyo called the Liberation Zone, where people murder each other for fun and surveillance robots roam the streets. I'm sure Yumiko's in here somewhere, right? The group hires a young guy named Kirara to guide them around to begin their search. That night, Asuka has another dream, this time involving him lashing out against his father, who is still Nakajima, as well as another deity called Susano. The next day, they meet Tashiro, who's actually once a member of the Sirens who played a role in killing Nakajima. He now regrets his former actions. Tashiro, aware that Yumiko is now reincarnated again, suggests suicide to further oneself along in the reincarnation process. Thanks for the advice. Afterwards, we get a bit more lore about this part of the city. It's basically one big power plant for demons to harvest human suffering and gather nourishment. The group almost becomes involved in the city's murder games, but something arguably worse happens. Reiko gets kidnapped by a vampire named Bertoli that likes to torture beautiful women. Bertoli? I don't know, that doesn't seem right, but that's what the book seems to say. Hopefully at some point, a real translator picks this shit up and just shakes their head at what I'm saying right now. So anyway, Asuka, Tashiro, Hirata, Father Costa, they all head out to save Reiko and hopefully find Yumiko on the way. Sure enough, Asuka finds the vampire and is able to harness the power of Susanoo to defeat it. And they do find Yumiko, but she's been driven kind of insane by the presence of Count Saint Germain's Nakajima hologram. The Count lets Yumiko loose on everyone, now aware that Asuka harbors Susanoo's abilities. Yumiko blasts Tashiro, who fails to convince her to calm the hell down, and just when shit looks like it's about to reach its worst, a god called Taniguku appears, takes control of Nagajima's soul and the hologram, and uses the hologram to speak to Yumiko, warning her not to fall down a path of violence. The spell wears off, and Nakajima is gone again, which drives Yumiko to fly away in sadness, having lost her friend for the second time. Oh yeah, and the vampire's mansion collapses. So, more sadness porn, but a decent bit of post-apocalyptic action. In fact, it kinda reminds me of Tokyo Revelation, as well as the early Shin Megami Tensei games. Now that we're fully into an apocalyptic world, I think the book's events are a bit more compelling, and Nishitani seems to have a bit more freedom in the scenarios that come up. That awkward in-between phase between Loki's defeat and the rise of Set really seemed to want to be realistic, considering the books take time to do shit like examine how the president and politicians respond to the events. Now that we're past all that, it feels a bit more entertaining. Well, God help us, we've got 5 more books to go, so let's see how far off the rails we can get. New Digital Devil Story 2, Queen of the Ice World was put out on February 28th, 1991. One of the Japanese fan sites I used for this video notes that starting here, the novels start to focus more on the actions of demons and deities rather than people versus Lucifer. I'm gonna do my best when explaining this book. It throws around a lot of names and got a little confusing. So, despite the fact that Count Saint Germain allowed Yumiko to escape, Lucifer still needs his help, and at the Count's advice, gives chase himself. Meanwhile, in the ensuing chaos and collapse of the vampire's place, Reiko seems to have died, and the god Taniguku, who's still hanging around from last time, decides to sacrifice himself for the Japanese goddess Amaterasu to revive her. Asuka and the crew escape the dangerous district of the city, and are rescued by the US military. He then gets introduced to none other than Charles Feed, who, as we know, worked closely with Nakajima previously to fight demons. Feed instructs Asuka and Reiko to head off in search of Yumiko again, who's apparently roaming around in some other district of the city, the Yamato's Special Ward. Is it just me, or is the basic premise of almost every book, let's go look for Yumiko? It's starting to get a little bit repetitive. Anyway, Feed explains that Izanami's death and subsequent reincarnation has changed something in Hades, and Lucifer is fearful of whatever that may be, hence why he's so hellbent on finding her. One of Loki's sons, a demon called Nari, guards the entrance to Hades in the same part of the city Yumiko's supposed to be in. Compared to his perverted, nasty-ass father, he's actually not entirely evil and seems to show at least some affinity towards humans. So, Asuka and Reiko sneak around disguised as inspectors who are responsible for transferring supplies between regions. They enlist the help of a prostitute to gather information and find their way around the city. Soon, they meet an old guy named Kuabiko who gives them some information about demons and the mountains of the surrounding area. The two end up getting into trouble with the Yakuza who roam the residential district, though eventually, Nari intervenes and breaks things up. Another inspector sees through Asuka and Reiko's disguises, and we learned that the gangsters were actually under his control, and the whole plan was to have Asuka killed since these parts of the city are lawless. The inspector begins antagonizing Reiko, but Kuwabiko comes in and casts a spell, which unlocks Reiko's inner potential, presumably the power of Amaterasu, which allows her to destroy the Yakuza. Reiko seems very shaken up by the incident, and ultimately, Asuka decides to leave his friend behind with Kuwabiko and continue the search for Yumiko on his own. Nari, having left at this point, uses the same ability as Loki of controlling flies to gather information about what happened in his absence. The story cuts to Count Saint Germain investigating anomalies in Hades. We're then introduced to the deity Hel, Loki's daughter, who brings with her frost giants from Niflheim to Lucifer's palace in Shinjuku. The reason for Hel's visitation was to claim that since Loki was the one who started all of this, she and Nare deserve their own shares of land on Earth. Lucifer promises them whatever they want, as long as they can help nab Yumiko and Asuka. Asuka ends up making his way deeper into the special ward, together with a prostitute from earlier, named Aya, and her younger brother Satoru. Upon arriving, Asuka has a battle with Nari. They're unable to best one another, though the book notes that Nari doesn't actually hate Asuka, and rather sees him as more of a rival than anything. Hel and Fenrir the Great Wolf arrive, where Hel explains that she doesn't just want a piece of the earth, she wants to have complete control over Hades as well. Nari is forced to hold them off, and unfortunately, Aya dies in the conflict, having been frozen by Hel's ice magic. Old man Kuwabiko manages to transport Asuka to Hades in an effort to save him, just as Hel turns her attention his way. The old man then gets blasted by the railgun of a massive ship called the Yormund. Alrighty then. So Nari, vowing revenge on Hel for blowing away that prostitute, decides to follow Asuka and plans to use him as a catalyst for his power. In Hades, Asuka meets the ghost of Akemi Nagajima, who saves him from the brink of death as he was recovering from the fight with Hel and Nari. Feeling inspired by Ghost Nagajima's love for Yumiko, Asuka presses onwards, determined to find her. When he finally does, Nari, Hel, and Fenrir happen to at the same time, and a big-ass fight goes down because the denizens of Hades don't take very kindly to visitors. In the thick of the fight, Nari offers to bestow Asuka with even greater power, and he agrees, becoming violently strong. With this added strength, Asuka beats Fenrir, forcing Hel to retreat. Hel summons the Yormund ship again, and the book ends with Lucifer developing a theory that Hades and the Makai demon world are part of the same dimension, and decides to send Beelzebub to scope out the fight going down. And that brings Queen of the Ice World to a close. I think what's cool about this one is that it really does resemble the demon factions and interactions you see in Shin Megami Tensei games. It's clear Aya Nishitani was inspired by the series its novel had spawned, and it's pretty fun to see what kind of ideas he comes up with for familiar demons we regularly see in the games. As I said earlier, this book was pretty difficult for me to figure out the plot to, just because of the sheer amount of names and location changes it has. I'm sure it's a cakewalk for someone more experienced in Japanese, but I don't really have any English resources to rely on for this, so for now, this is as detailed as I can get. Let's see if Book 3 ramps up the challenge even further. The third new Digital Devil storybook was released on August 31st, 1991. The Megaten wiki doesn't have anything for this book except its title, referring to it as Planet of the Devil, but to me the title looks like Planet of Divine Spirits or Planet of Gods and Demons. I guess it's all kind of the same thing one way or another. Some pretty significant stuff goes down in this thing. First of all, I think I just couldn't parse this from the second book, but Hades is actually a planet, and it can be found near Pluto. The more you know. Beelzebub heads there with the Yormund ship after receiving Hel's distress signal. Lucifer and Saint Germain mark the location of Hades for future reference. Then we learn the true identity of Saint Germain. He's fucking Judas Iscariot. You know, the guy who betrayed Jesus Christ himself in the Bible. Germain's purpose is to use science and technology to uncover the secrets of God. Alright, now we're talking. This sounds like a Shin Megami Tensei game. Back on Hades, Asuka ends up meeting a whole host of Japanese deities who are trapped in a fort, including Ame no Uzume, Hidezaka, Saru Tahiko, some dude in a black robe, and Yumiko/Izanami's corpse in a crystal burial chamber. Don't worry, she's probably fine. Uzume explains to Asuka that a being called Ame no Mina Kanushi created all Japanese deities and could, for all intents and purposes, be considered the one god of Japanese religion. Then, Hell begins bombarding the fortress with the Yormund. Each of the deities begins to fight off the ship while Beelzebub watches from afar. While the fight starts off in favor of the Japanese deities, some infighting begins amongst them, and though everyone manages to continue their defenses, they're getting worn down. Asuka is included in all of the proceedings. After all, he is the reincarnation of Susanoo. While nobody's worried about Lucifer directly attacking, as he won't make a move until he's fully figured out how Hades works, Hell is a loose cannon, and her actions are totally unpredictable. Meanwhile, Charles Feed and Kirara, if you even remember them at this point, are doing their best to support Asuka and Reiko's bioenergy from afar. Speaking of Reiko, she's not doing so great, having been left behind by Asuka to wallow around in her own sadness. Satoru, the brother of Aya, the prostitute who died at the hands of Hell, ends up letting it slip that Nari got into a big fight and may be dead. So many names. A warlord uses the rumor that Nari may be dead to his advantage and invades the area, hoping to increase his territory. The district is caught off guard, and the warlord captures Satoru and Reiko, using them as leverage to demand territory from Lucifer. Lucifer's got bigger fish to fry at the moment. It turns out, Nari and Asuka's alliance was all a big part of his grand plan, and they begin to conspire to kill Asuka without the other Japanese deities finding out. The captured Satoru manages to somehow summon Cerberus by randomly discovering a handheld computer, who then saves them. Reiko heads off to pursue Asuka, who is at that moment preoccupied in Hades as he seems distracted by Yumiko's coffin, which also contains the perfectly preserved corpse of Nakajima. Asuka recognizes that some part of what he's seeing is an illusion created by the demons to waste his time, but this whole thing is in fact real and it appears again later. A little weird. Hell, with the Yormund, plans to distract the Japanese deities while Beelzebub sneaks into their fortress to blow it sky high. Beelzebub's caught during his entrance and Asuka is sent to confront him. Obviously, Beelzebub is much, much stronger, but Reiko, as well as other members of the Crusaders, arrive in Hades with Cerberus to help out. Uzume and Sarutahiko end up going down in the fight, but suddenly, the deities that are remaining begin manipulating Izanami's corpse to fight for them, and with magnificent power, she blows away Hell and her ship. Asuka starts to watch this and gets pissed off because Yumiko isn't actually trying to fight, and she's kind of just being controlled like a puppet. I mean, it is working, but I can see why that might be a little morally objectionable. While Asuka's distracted, Beelzebub grabs him and carries him away. Despite the fact that he and Reiko are finally reunited, it looks like they're going to be separated yet again. This book is basically a damn war novel. It might be my favorite one out of the new Digital Devil Story series up to this point. You get some surprising revelations. Saint Germain is Judas. God is going to play a future role in the story. And you get a hell of a lot of action in Japanese mythology. Not too bad. The only thing I'm not really fond of is how Yumiko, throughout all of these books, is just here one moment, gone the next, dead one moment, blowing people away after that. It feels a little clunky, though I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, since I can't actually fully read every individual sentence. Well, just 3 more of these things to go. On April 30th of God's year 1992, the world was blessed with new Digital Devil Story 4, Wrath of the Emperor. Having been captured by Beelzebub, Asuka is presented with an offer. Use Nari's power and join the demons. He actually nearly gets tricked into it, until ghostly Nakajima returns to bring Asuka back to his senses. Nakajima also calms down Nari's immense rage and prevents him from turning on Asuka. Afterwards, Asuka retreats to a burial mound housing Emperor Sutoku, a real guy who ruled Japan from the year 1123 to 1142. Beelzebub seems to join him, but it was a little confusing to me as to why. I think it's because he's sneaking into the tomb behind him, but it also could be Nakajima's irresistible charms. Let's hope someone corrects me on that in the future. Anyway, a being called Ame no Taji Karao guards the tomb, and having heard about Asuka's rage towards the Japanese deities using Yumiko as a weapon, it decides to attack him. Asuka ends up making it past, deeper into the Emperor's burial site. At the same time, back at the main battleground, the remaining Japanese deities are on the defensive. Reiko, as well as Father Costa and the other Crusaders, sense something wrong with the seal on Sutoku's tomb. What is this, a fucking Indiana Jones movie? Back at the tomb, Asuka and Beelzebub end up breaking the Emperor's seal, and that guy wastes no time in gathering an army of lost souls to march on the fortress and reclaim Yumiko's body. Reiko ends up reuniting again with Asuka, and Hell's assault rages harder than ever, as she begins to finally wear down the fortress and engage in combat with Sutoku and his army. There are significant casualties on both sides. In the chaos, they take the opportunity to bring Yumiko away from the fighting. Reiko seems to think that the reason Yumiko doesn't want to do that much to willingly help out or leave the coffin she shares with Nakajima is because she's still too attached to him. She hopes that once Yumiko realizes Nakajima's actually gone, maybe they can stop chasing her all over the entire fucking universe. As Asuka and Reiko debate about what the hell to do, suddenly Sutoku bursts in, having defeated the armies of Niflheim. We learn that Sutoku's purpose is to be reborn with his memories and vengeful spirit intact with Izanami's help. He possesses Nakajima's corpse to trick Yumiko, but somehow Nakajima seems to fight him off, though his body starts to disintegrate afterwards. Yumiko snaps out of her trance as Nakajima promises to see her again one day, even if it takes thousands of years. Sutoku then begins the reincarnation process. Beelzebub returns to Lucifer and reports on the situation, explaining that Sutoku would prove to be a very powerful ally for their forces. Hell, who's basically out of ideas at this point, decides to try one more thing and enlists the help of her brother Jormungandr, swearing that she will destroy Hades and the Earth. Then shit cuts back to the real world where we learn about the United States. I guess that's important. Yeah, you know what, as a matter of fact, what the hell is going on over there anyway? Well, as it turns out, the whole country is safe from demons because it's under the protection of John Quirk, the Vice President, also known as Gabriel the Archangel. Is he quirky though? Kinda. Quirk expresses his idea to annihilate the Japanese soon if they can't get their demon problem under control. Oh, John. We also learn that Asuka is publicly recognized as a terrorist at this point, though people are actively joining the Crusaders to expand their influence and conduct public relations with others who are suspicious of their goals. Apparently planning to challenge Gabriel, Lucifer sends his wife Lilith to meet up with Sutoku and two other revived Japanese figures, the samurai Minamoto no Tametomo and the statesman Fujiwara no Yorinaga. Oh boy, so is God gonna make an appearance? How's this all gonna go down? The plot of this book wasn't nearly as interesting as the one before it, though that little bit with Nakajima vowing to see Yumiko again was kinda touching. Well, you know, as touching as shit can get when you're like 6 books deep into an unending nightmare. I gotta say, I didn't expect him to actually be involved this late in the game, so it's cool to at least see characters from the very beginning still have some sort of influence over the plot. I wasn't sure how connected these books would actually be to the original trilogy, and I was surprised to find out that, yeah, these are basically just straight up sequels, and probably didn't even need to be their own series. Well, let's just move on. With just 2 books to go, the climax must be nearing. New Digital Devil Story 5, The Eternal Goddess, was published December 31st, 1992. After the whole mess with Sutoku's reincarnation and the end of the battle with Hell, Yumiko transports Asuka and the remaining Japanese forces back to Earth. Yumiko vows to defend Hades and await Nakajima's eventual return, and encourages the others to reclaim Japan. Some of the Japanese deities, Onakata and Princess Yasaka, are ordered to create a sanctuary that is impervious to demon attack. Asuka, Reiko, and the others end up getting in a fight with one of Lucifer's guys, but they succeed in fighting them off and meet back up with Professor Feed, Kanata, and the United States Navy, of course. Elsewhere, Lucifer and Sutoku are hanging out, and Sutoku expresses his desire to destroy Japan. Lucifer educates him a little bit and explains that he could conquer the entire world instead, offering him half of his dominion. Sutoku, apparently worried about how the world has rapidly modernized and become polluted, decides to join up with Lucifer. He may be evil, but hey, at least he recycles. Back at the Crusaders' base, there's this big debate going down between the Catholic Crusaders and the representatives of the Protestant United States. They can't seem to resolve their differences between their religious views for a while, but decide to join forces against all of demonkind once they bear witness to Gabriel's unmistakable holy power. This bit is pretty neat to me. I mean, usually the factions in Shin Megami Tensei don't take something like religious denominations into account. There's usually always a law faction who blindly trusts God, but I can't recall many instances of acknowledging how one can worship the same God slightly differently. Anyway, Asuka and Reiko are busy meeting up with some old high school friends, Kengo and Eri, who have since joined the Crusade. The group comes up with a plan to spread more of their influence around the high school. Meanwhile, a United States satellite hijacks the airwaves in Japan and begins playing pro-God propaganda everywhere. Nobody on the side of the demons can figure out how to stop the broadcast until Lucifer flies his ass up to space and destroys the satellite himself. Count Saint Germain is pissed off and urges everyone to take this matter to the Japanese press, hoping that they can publicly denounce the US and sway public opinion for the illegal stunt they pulled. Back at school, Asuka enlists the help of a student to give him information on how many members of the police and demon faction have infiltrated the place as this is going on. The Crusaders' planning all culminates in an uprising on the final day of classes at school. Asuka, as well as several others, stand up during the school's closing ceremony, denouncing the demons as well as the police who follow their orders. Unfortunately, Lucifer and the boys were playing 5D chess yet again and had all this shit calculated. That student Asuka asked for help in scoping the place out was a fucking hologram created by Count Saint Germain, who was disappointed at the pathetic resistance effort. The police quickly stifled the uprising, and several students who are on Asuka's side are possessed by Germain and made to fight against him. He gets his shit beat pretty hard, so thankfully, Reiko is able to use her power to force the evil spirits out of their friends' bodies. As Asuka lays on the ground and bleeds profusely, the blood causes some weird-ass space-time distortion, which is seemingly because he and Yumiko, being reincarnations of deities who are mother and son, are connected to each other despite the distance between the two. Yumiko, from all the way back in Hades, is able to help Asuka recover by embracing him through her consciousness. Nice. However, things in Hades are about to get interesting. Hel and Jormungandr, the Great Serpent, are ready for another round of combat. Well, Yumiko seems to make short work of the Serpent, pretty much effortlessly dispatching it with flames. Hel gets mega pissed and exclaims that she no longer cares about serving Lucifer or facing God, she just wants to get Yumiko. Hel abandons her ship and descends to fight Yumiko directly, opting to use an extremely powerful and self-destructive attack that would take her and Hades with it. It seems to work momentarily, but Yumiko ultimately succeeds, and with the help of Cerberus, regenerates Hades to make it look like none of this shit ever happened. The book ends with Sutoku arriving in New York City as he starts to sow discontent among the poor to lure out the Archangel Gabriel. You know what? Let's hold back on talking about this just for a bit and jump directly into the final book. I just can't resist, and trust me, it's crazy. The sixth and final new Digital Devil story novel, Bonds of Reincarnation, was published exactly a year after the previous one, December 31st, 1993. Alright, so we pick back up with Sutoku succeeding in creating riots across New York. Then we meet this Russian dude who had immigrated to the US named Alexander Strasovich, who at the request of Lilith is constructing a nuclear bomb in his home. Off to a great start. John Quirk decides to hop into a riot personally and resolve the situation all on his own because he assumes that demons are behind it, but when he realizes it's all just angry people who have been influenced by a 900-year-old samurai, he gets pissed and accidentally reveals his identity as an archangel. Well, since it's all out in the open now that the United States is being run by one of God's angels, he takes the opportunity to explain that their true enemy is Japan being run by Lucifer. Around the time that he gives this big reveal speech, Washington, D.C. gets evaporated by a nuke. Oh. Well, looks like Gabriel's the president now. Predictably, it was Alexander and Lilith's fault. With an excuse for the two countries to openly go to war, Lucifer begins creating plans with Lilith, Beelzebub, and Saint Germain. Meanwhile, Reiko, Asuka, and the others are hiding out from the authorities. Reiko believes that defending the United States is absolutely necessary or demons will have free reign over the entire world. Despite the fact that the Pentagon was entirely destroyed along with the rest of DC, they decide to retaliate with nuclear missiles towards Japan and Russia. I'm sure this will end well. Sutoku ends up arriving at the UN building where he meets with Gabriel, and after talking things over for a bit, remembers his true purpose isn't to fuck around with Lucifer, but rather to curse Japan with his unquenchable rage. Asuka and Rei, who have also been transported to New York, witness a man get possessed by the spirit of Michael the Archangel, who then communicates to everyone the word of God. God says not to drop nukes on Japan or the entire Earth will inevitably be destroyed. Huh, you know what? It's actually pretty rational. Now you'd think that Sutoku going home to continue being an asshole ghost and God telling everyone not to start a full-on nuclear war would wrap up at least a few problems, but in true Digital Devil story fashion, there are more double crosses that have to occur. So, Lilith doesn't actually want to rule the Earth with Lucifer, and actually wants God to purge the entire thing clean. Also, Beelzebub is making a beeline straight for the US's nuclear missiles. As Gabriel moves to intercept Beelzebub, Lilith travels to Central Park and kills thousands of people. Alrighty then. The military chiefs of staff end up launching nukes towards Russia and Japan anyway, despite God's orders, and Gabriel, in the middle of their fight, asks Beelzebub to chill out for a second so he can go grab the Russia-bound missiles straight out of the air. Lucifer catches the one headed towards Japan. Does this sound stupidly ridiculous to you yet? Well, it gets worse. So, Sutoku, on his way back from the States with his buddy the Samurai and the Statesman from way earlier, make a pit stop in China where they grab some cruise missiles and round up angry Chinese spirits who were slaughtered by the Japanese during World War II. Yeah, it really goes here. Sutoku and the Chinese spirits fight through demons and fighter jets and a whole bunch of other shit, and eventually a cruise missile strikes Lucifer's palace in Shinjuku. Satisfied with his destruction, Sutoku finally vanishes for good and vows to return in thousands of years to do it again. Oh boy. As Gabriel despairs at the fact that Japan has been hit, suddenly, a fucking meteor hits Florida, and Archangel Michael explains that God is actually improving the planet in his own way by killing off a significant portion of its population. I guess God has a huge hate boner for Floridians? But wait, didn't he say not to use nukes? I guess they're man-made and a meteor is a more natural way of cleansing the planet? Still, come on, I thought for a second he was gonna play nice. It's unclear to me whether another meteor hits New York or the thing was just so big that it destroys the entire eastern side of the United States, but Asuka, Reiko, and the others barely survive as they nearly fall into a massive crevice in the earth. As the end of the book draws near, we learn that nearly the entire population of North America has died. In the year 2020, yes, the book ends in 2020, Charles Feed and the Crusaders search the world for survivors as the planet struggles to cope with what the hell just happened. He travels around with a boy named Angel that he met in India. Angel ends up leading him back to Izanami's burial site, way back from the first book, and takes him to the inner chamber, where he sees a statue of Izanami. Angel kisses the statue, which then revives it. It's Yumiko, and guess who the fuck Angel is? It's Akemi Nakajima, reborn after only like 30 years due to his sheer strength of will. And that's it. What happens to Asuka and Reiko? What the hell happens to Lilith? Do the Russians ever do anything else? I don't know. It doesn't seem to explain any of that. Does Lucifer die? Is Gabriel still out there fighting? Even the Japanese fan site that I used to gather all of the information on this book seems to have absolutely no idea. It just ends, leaving so many plot threads dangling in the wind for all of eternity. At least Nakajima comes back to life as an Indian kid, though. These 9 books are some of the strangest things I've ever researched. The series just goes in every direction you can imagine. Horror, sci-fi, huge battles between ancient deities, political scandals. There are like 700 betrayals and secret schemes, and it truly feels like a universe where anything could happen. I could have said that in one chapter, Asuka and Reiko sneak into a fucking banana factory to burn it down and cause a worldwide potassium shortage to kill a resurrected Adolf Hitler, and it wouldn't have been that much of a stretch. I can't say that any of these books are excellent, but they are extremely imaginative, and it's clear Aya Nishitani had a lot of interesting ideas in his head for telling what essentially amounts to a very long, drawn-out love story between two Japanese students. It's batshit insane, and I think it'd be a great thing to have these be more accessible one day. Reading through the events of these books just feels like coming across the work of a guy who wasn't afraid to use any of his ideas for better or worse, and there's something extremely entertaining and memorable about that, even if the books themselves are quite far from masterpieces. I think it's extremely unlikely that we'll ever see these things get full English translations, but hey, fingers crossed that the day eventually comes. Regardless, if you're a big Megaten fan, I think you owe it to yourself to at least check out the first book, which you can easily read in English thanks to a devoted fan. Well, that was a whole lot longer than I thought this video was gonna be, but I hope it was interesting enough anyway. There's a whole world of Megami Tensei stuff out there that's easy to miss if you're a Western fan, and I'd love for more people to be talking about these. If you've read any of the books yourself, please feel free to comment, and if you can correct any of the information I'm presenting in the untranslated ones, that would be even more appreciated. I did my best, but I'm sure there are many more gaps to fill and corrections to make that a better trained eye could spot. Thanks for watching the video to the end if you made it this far. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video.